Miguel and Devin Miller back here on the Cage Rage podcast. We're going to hit you with one of our Cage Rage minutes here. News coming in from the lightweight division. Actually, news has been stacking up for a couple of weeks. A lot of news in what is the UFC's hottest division, and really not a lot of fixed fights here. Devin, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Miguel, man. This is definitely the best division in the sport, and there's a lot going on in it, and things are shaping up. We're going to get some good matchups soon.
You got to hope so, because right now we're kind of in a little bit of chaos, you know? It starts with the champ. You got Khabib sitting there, officially suspended now. He was officially suspended through the July time frame. July gives him the full 9 months that the Nevada State Commission issued him for suspension. Khabib, sort of the last time we heard from him officially, was saying he's going to take off till November in kind of camaraderie with his teammates who had a year-long suspension. So we're not even sure where we're going to see him. What the UFC's done in the interim is they put together Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier for an interim title, and they've announced that the winner of that match will be Khabib's return fight, kind of putting Tony Ferguson on ice. Tony Ferguson kind of in limbo right now. So that's a lot to chew on right in and of itself right there. Go ahead, Devin. Give me your scoop.
Well, yeah, like with Khabib right now, we don't really know what's going to happen, because 1 minute he's talking about he's going to sit out till November. The next minute he's begging George St. Pierre not to retire and to fight him. There's been some mentions of him fighting Tony, and now they brought in this interim title fight, and according to Dana, they wanted it to be Tony Ferguson versus Max Holloway for the interim title. Max Holloway being the current UFC Featherweight champion. As you mentioned, Khabib is suspended for 9 months officially until July 6th. He can get that brought back to April if he does some anti-bullying PR thing for Vegas, which he's refused to do. I don't know if he's going to hold out till November, but it is interesting what's going to happen in this division, because you got a good interim title fight, and this is coming up in April. I think it's April. Do you know the exact date?
Yeah, I believe it's April 12th or 13th, right?
Yeah, I think April 13th for the UFC 236 main event between Holloway and Poirier, and this is going to be a rematch. Poirier's on a 3-fight win streak, and Holloway's won, I think, 12 straight fights, and Poirier's coming off of a finish of Eddie Alvarez. And the person that this leaves really out in the limb, and we don't know what's going to happen to, is Tony Ferguson, because Tony Ferguson's on an 11-fight win streak in this division. He's clearly the number one contender. Dana's out saying he doesn't know what's going to go on with him next, and he apparently refused to take the interim title fight against Max, so they gave it to Poirier. And it's very, like you said, it's really confusing, because what do they do with Tony now that they've got this interim title fight? Because they're going to have Max and Poirier fight. There's going to be a winner. That person's going to be holding an interim belt. Khabib's going to be on the sidelines. So you're going to have this guy that's got an 11-fight win streak, clearly the number one contender, and a new interim title holder, both wanting a shot at Khabib next. So it's really confusing. It's a log game up at the top.
Yep, and it doesn't look like there's a real clear path that makes everybody happy. Ferguson may be the odd man out, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of some recent social media blasts that came from a lot of people from this weight class, including Dustin Poirier. Hey, UFC, let me go, and I'll find work at Bellator or wherever it is. Could Ferguson wind up with Bellator?
I mean, I think that'd be a really bad loss if they did let that happen. I hope they don't, because the fight that I think is probably the most just absolutely necessary fight right now that we have not happened. It seems like the cursed fight in MMA right now is Tony Ferguson versus Khabib. They've went through everybody between the two of them in this division, minus maybe Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway. Max Holloway just now is entering into this division, and Poirier hasn't fought either one of them. But that fight's been supposed to happen 4 different times, fallen through 4 different times for various different reasons. And other than somebody like maybe Conor McGregor, which I just don't think that's something that Conor's going to want to do right now coming off of the Khabib loss, I just don't know what happens with Tony. I'm holding out hope that they will make Tony and Khabib in either July or August before the November card, and then the winner of that can fight the winner of the Poirier-Holloway fight. I think that that's the best thing they can do to salvage this division right now, kind of make it like a little 4-man tournament, where the winners fight each other in the end. But that also leaves out Conor McGregor. And when we talk about Conor McGregor, we're still talking about the biggest star of the sport. And there's been some rumors about him fighting Donald Cerrone.
That was supposed to be almost a done deal at some point, and now there's word on the internet that Papadena is not happy with the guys, that they wanted to give it a co-feature spot with another big fight, and obviously it would have to be a big world title fight. The bottom line is Cerrone and McGregor right now don't have a belt between them, so it wouldn't be a title fight. At the end of the day, they're arguing over semantics, and I can't say that I disagree with Dana on this one. Similar to the Ben Askren situation, you can only let fighters make their own call so much. You know what I mean? And here's a situation where McGregor's got to fight. He's going to get paid. He's going to make his money. But he's refusing, or there's a problem with him not going on last. Not being the headline act, so to speak, or having to share the bill. Now we're getting into, if it's going to hold up the match, we're getting into real chaos here because Conor McGregor is going to be very hard to make happy.
I agree, and I thought that a good business strategy for the UFC and for ESPN would be to have Conor McGregor fight on the ESPN Plus app in the main event of a fight night against Donald Cerrone, because it would bring in so many new subscribers. There'd be a lot of views on the ESPN app. I don't know if that's going to be an issue in terms of money, because Conor's definitely somebody that's going to definitely not fight for probably less than a couple $1 million, or if it has to do with more of the UFC just not wanting to give those views to ESPN and more wanting to pocket the pay-per-view cash that they still can get out of McGregor, especially if it's a co-feature behind, let's say, DC versus Stipe or DC versus Brock Lesnar, or maybe in July, if they can somehow manage to round up Khabib to fight Tony. I mean, I think that would be a massive pay-per-view if they could do Khabib Tony with a co-feature with McGregor and Donald Cerrone. I don't know what's going to happen. I still think that that's still a fight that could definitely happen. If Conor and Cerrone does fall through, I do not anticipate seeing Conor and Tony. If Conor and Cerrone does fall through, I don't anticipate seeing Conor versus Tony. I could be wrong about that. I don't think they'll do that. It would be a big fight for Tony. I think Tony would take it. I just don't know if McGregor would. I think a wild card in the whole situation could be Iaquinta, which is somebody who's kind of like the real slept-on fighter in this division right now. He's currently ranked number 4, and he just got his second win over Kevin Lee. And him and Conor had back and forth after Conor's fight with Khabib, because Iaquinta was out there saying, look, I guess I'm a real estate agent, but I took that fight on less than 24-hour notice, and I went 5 rounds with him, and you couldn't get out of the fourth. Mm-hmm. So I think that'd be an interesting fight for Conor, that Conor would feel comfortable coming back against. That would be a potential win on his resume. But Iaquinta is nobody really to sleep on.
Yeah, I agree. That's part of what you were talking about earlier with the depth of the division. Iaquinta, a guy who's coming off a title shot, so he's not really in the immediate title picture anymore. But he's going to have to fit the bill and get into one of these fights. And I think obviously at this point, and you pointed it out too, any one of these fighters will take the Conor McGregor fight. It's like, they'll put aside even a title fight or anything like that probably for the Conor McGregor fight and what that means as a payday. So if Iaquinta can cash that check, he'll be very happy to do so. Now, there are a couple of other contenders, a couple other guys making noise in this division. One of them is getting points for exciting wins and exciting losses is Justin Gaethje, who's come over and fit real well into the UFC, kind of assumed a good soldier role and has just taken every fight that they've given him also. He's lined up to face, I believe, Edson Barbosa.
Yeah, this fight's at the end of the month. This is actually going to be the first fight that we have currently scheduled in the top 10. I believe this is March 30th on the ESPN, on the second UFC on ESPN network card. And it's going to be the main event. And Barbosa's coming in ranked number 6, and Gaethje's coming in ranked number 7. Barbosa just, he had 2 hard losses in the past few years, one to Khabib Nurmagomedov, the champion, and then Kevin Lee beat him up real bad. But then he came back and just completely battered Dan Hooker in his last fight. And Justin Gaethje had a very exciting debut against Michael Johnson. Then he had a couple hard losses to Dustin Poirier and to Eddie Alvarez all three of those were very exciting fights. Comes back in his fourth appearance inside the octagon and just puts the lights out on James Vick in about 3 minutes into the first round. So that's a really good fight, and that should be another very exciting Gaethje fight. I don't know exactly who I'm calling on that fight yet. I think Barbosa's a more technical striker, but Gaethje has a lot of power. He's very gritty. He pushes a lot of very good pace, and that's typically what's been Barbosa's Achilles heel, is somebody that can really pressure him. So I think that's a really good fight, and I think the winner of that is going to be right there in contention too. This division is so stacked with talent.
In terms of Gaethje, a guy who came over with a resume from the World Series of Fighting and is generally fighters from other organizations are not that well received in the UFC. Here, he's gone 2-2, but he's already gotten the points for the exciting fights and stuff, and he seems to be fitting right in for a long run on this roster. He just needs to get together a couple of wins here. Barbosa, he's been around a while. I don't know if the problem with Barbosa for me is, I don't know if Barbosa excites me as a threat to Khabib, excites me as a threat, to Ferguson, or as a potential matchup for Conor McGregor. He doesn't fit the bill for that just yet. So Barbosa, maybe with an exciting win here at the end of March, can, but I think Gaethje is the one with a little more topside on that fight. I don't know if I'm picking him yet either, but it is an exciting fight that's on the radar here.
Yeah, I agree. And there's actually another fight that it has top 10 implications that I'm not sure it's 100% confirmed, but it has been mentioned, and it is listed as a rumor, and I think it's being scheduled for May is all that the headlines that I could find about it have said. So I think they're debating which card they want to try to land it on. But it's between number 5 ranked Kevin Lee in the division and a very hot prospect that a lot of people think is going to be somebody that's going to shake up this division even more than it already is, and that's number 11 ranked Gregor Gillespie. And he's an undefeated prospect, a very good wrestler, and a lot of people are thinking that he could be a stylistic nightmare for even somebody like Khabib, because Khabib's wrestling is such a primary focus of his game, and if he can go in there against somebody that is just as good, if not better, of a wrestler than he is, that it might really affect his performance. So I think that's an interesting fight. And props to Kevin Lee, who just is going through murderer's row right now. I mean, from Tony Ferguson to then he went to Edson Barbosa. Then after that, he fought Iaquinta. Now he's getting ready to possibly fight Gregor Gillespie, coming off a loss. I think that's a big risk for Kevin Lee, who's such a young fighter, who a lot of people thought was going to be the future of this division, and has taken some losses going against Gregor Gillespie. But Kevin Lee's got really good wrestling too, so that's definitely going to be a fight that we're going to find out a lot about this Gillespie kid. And I don't know what your impression of him is so far, Miguel.
Well, he's done all the right things. I do tend to stay off the hype trains for an extended period of time. I do want to see more. I do want to see how he fights hurt. I'd like to see a little bit of a diversification in his attack. For what we've seen, he's been pretty dominant. I agree that Kevin Lee is in a situation where hopefully he's getting points for doing the hard work and not saying no to fights. Here, he's fighting tough guys all the way through, and each one increasingly like a little less name recognition to him. So it's like he's putting his name out more. He's clearly here to give Gillespie, his spot kind of thing if it works out that way. And, for Kevin Lee, hopefully he holds on to it. At 5, he's still in a good spot if he can pull off a couple of wins in a row here.
Yeah, I agree. And Kevin Lee is somebody that's also been very, very vocal about shooting for a 65 division, because I think that's one of his biggest problems. I think that he is somebody that would do really well if he could go up in weight, but he doesn't seem to want to make 170 an option. And he would be kind of a small guy, especially from what we just seen with somebody like Kamaru Usman, who plays a lot of that same style and is just so much bigger. So a 165 division would probably be good for him, but right now making this tough cut, I think it's hampering his performance. He's a very talented kid, and he would, if he could beat the top guys and be a true contender, I think that he would be a big personality that could potentially be a big pay-per-view draw. But he, that loss to Iaquinta really hurt him. And going from here, Miguel, I mean, we've kind of covered the landscape, but we always have to acknowledge that we could be wrong. But I just want to just pick your brain a little bit about what you project that is going to happen, because right now I think the big interesting thing is that Conor McGregor's been so silent, and they've been talking about the Cerrone fight. Now, like you mentioned, they're talking about that they're having a hard time making that. I threw out Iaquinta as a possible somebody that could possibly sneak in and get that fight, but they've also got the Diaz fight, the Diaz trilogy that they could pull out at any time, but eventually most likely will happen. They've also got Tony. So I mean, when we got these fighters that don't have a fight yet, and we got Khabib, what do you project to see happening in this division if you had to go on your gut?
Well, I can tell you what I would be aiming for, and the UFC, I think, has put himself in a difficult situation. Here at the Cage Rage podcast, I think we started waving the flags immediately after the McGregor-Khabib fight that they're going to be dealing with a cultural situation with Khabib that they're going to have to make right with this guy. They haven't made right with Khabib yet, as far as I can see, especially in public. Khabib still very, aggressive and backing his teammates and thinking he's in the right in public. Khabib also doing, the fact is Khabib has something like 15 million Twitter followers because, you get a couple of million every time you're a UFC champion in the United States and stuff. And on top of that, he has this whole cultural following from Chechnya. That makes him really powerful. That means that he also has a lot of different voices that he listens to. So, including, what it is to, a man's respect and things like that. Lines that McGregor crossed that he can't really turn to his millions of followers at home and say, yeah, we're going to let him slide on that. Not if they all feel that an insult was transgressed. So I think that is the overwhelming problem that the UFC has not faced down yet, is that what is the situation with Khabib? He's suspended. He's willing to sit out longer than the suspension. He's got an option to shorten the suspension that he doesn't want to take. They haven't fixed anything with this guy. Nobody's talking to him, and I don't see any good signs there as far as communications are concerned. I think McGregor, if I'm not mistaken on my read on him, I think McGregor would be pushing for the Khabib rematch right away. I think that's kind of what suits him. I think it's been his pattern before. I think he'd like to correct that wrong right off the bat. And that may be what's holding up some of the other stuff with McGregor as well. And why he's so silent, because you can't talk about them. He's also under suspension, so we really can't, nothing comes up until all those suspensions go up. So with the two top names and, matchups in the division such in limbo still, the UFC really has to have a holding pattern. I like the Holloway fight. Holloway-Ferguson would have been a through-the-roof fight. Poirier is really a step below Ferguson in terms of contendership right now in my book. I don't know if I'm not saying he's less talented, but he has taken more losses. We've seen more holes in his game, and he just hasn't had the run that Ferguson has. So Ferguson-Holloway was a great idea, and then Ferguson's personality gets involved, where he feels like he should be in a title shot right away, and the interim title doesn't suit him and stuff. So I think that they've got a management nightmare in terms of their personalities and in terms of lining everyone up. So, like I said, they have to make some decisions, especially when certain guys like Conor are guys that say, hey, this is what I want, and they sort of get what they want. So there comes a point where it may help them with the rest of the division to not cater so much to Conor. So I think it's wide open right now. I think they do the interim title fight, the scenario you mentioned earlier, which is they do the interim title fight, they somehow get through to Khabib, fix things so that Khabib can return, not in November, but sooner in July or in that time frame. Then you can put Khabib in with Ferguson right away while the interim title sits a little bit, and then you can match them up by the end of the year and perhaps have one champion. That's probably the best scenario that doesn't freeze out Ferguson. And like I said, I'm worried about Ferguson leaving or asking to be cut in some way, shape, or form because of this, again, it just looks like the UFC isn't treating any of their guys with any respect. It's like, yeah, well, we'll figure it out. When we do, we'll let you know. And I'm not even sure, that's what's best, So right now it's still chaotic. The best scenario, Khabib and the UFC fix things. Khabib returns sooner than November, which is what it looks like right now, and that Khabib fights Ferguson. That would be the best case scenario. That leaves you with Cerrone and McGregor as another big money fight, and it leaves you with the interim title of Holloway and Poirier, versus the winner of Ferguson and Khabib. So you've got great fights all the way around.
I think where they really went wrong, in my opinion, is I think they pushed Max up into this division way too soon. And I think that it was inevitable for Max to go up there. He is a big name. But instead of making Max versus intending to make Max versus Tony versus Dustin would have made a lot more sense, because even if Tony would have taken this fight, then what do you do with Poirier, who's right there in the top of the division? And, I guess they could have made him against Conor or Iaquinta, but no matter what, they've got all these different contenders that are on the cusp of the title fight. They've got to do something with Ferguson. And because, you can't just have a guy with an 11-fight win streak, clearly the number one contender, and you're going to have an interim title holder soon. You're going to have the most popular guy in the sport in that division, and you're going to have the champion sitting out till November. It's a mess. It really is a mess, and there's really no quick fix. Probably the most possible thing that they could do is try to get it all straightened out as soon as possible would be to try to get Tony and Conor to fight, and then they have the winner of Poirier and Max. They have the winner of Tony and Conor, and then they just kind of go from there to see who fights Khabib. If Khabib really sits out till November, if he comes back, he's got to fight Tony in the summer, in my opinion. And then after that, he's got to fight that interim title fight, and that makes Conor not getting the title fight till at least 2001. So they've got an endless line of potential title fights, and it's really log jammed up in that division. I'm interested to see but the big thing for me is what's going to happen next with Conor, Khabib, and Tony, because those are the three that are at the top of the division, and now they're going to have an interim title holder that's not any of those three. So it's a very interesting division. I think we've covered it pretty well.
Well, I do want to touch on one thing that you touched on, which I think is a very important factor, is that bringing Max Holloway to this weight class did add to the chaos. However, in the case of Holloway, he's on such a run at 145 pounds, arguably the second most stacked weight class, right, that now he's an established champion, and he's facing a lot of young guns, a lot of guys coming up. So it does almost feel like, either you're going to have to go back and either recycle opponents or face a lot of young guns, which it means perhaps not a lot of name recognition. The opponents, perhaps the paydays are affected. Perhaps you get co-feature spot instead of. So for him, I think business-wise, it was the right time. The other X factor with Holloway, especially with an interim belt under, he's favored against Poirier right now. That's the interesting part to me is Holloway, talent-wise, isn't a smaller guy coming up or anything like that. When the odds came out and when people are talking about matchups, Holloway's already right there as a 155-pounder. And with a win, if he somehow gets even an interim belt, he becomes an interesting story and another potential opponent for McGregor because of their rematch, because it would be a rematch. McGregor holds a win over him, so McGregor would obviously not want to just fight him, but if he had a belt, then he's going to be on McGregor's list, I think. And McGregor, at the end of the day, say, hey, I beat him before. Holloway's come a long way, but, McGregor's not really a guy who shies away from people. So I think he did add to the chaos, but he also becomes, with a couple of wins, maybe one of the top three key players in this weight class.
Yeah, that what you just said could sort their problem out, and it might be why they're starting to be hesitant on the Cerrone fight, because if Khabib really does sit out till November, their only way of maybe making all this straighten out is to have, let's say Holloway beats Poirier, is having Holloway and McGregor fight after that for the interim title, and then have the undisputed title in November, and then match the winner, whoever gets through, the two winners that get through all that, up in 2020 sometime. But
Yeah,
no matter what, in this division we've got like 3 or 4 good title fights down the line. We've got definitely a stacked division from here on for the next couple of years. Yep. And as fans, we're gonna get treated to a lot of great fights.
The last scenario involving Holloway's ascension sort of leaves Ferguson out in the cold, which is why maybe in the 2 scenarios that we've run, it's the B of the 2 scenarios. But there's a lot going on in the lightweights. I'm sure we'll do another wrap-up on the lightweight division here real soon because some of these things are going to start to get decided here. But like I said, number one thing to look for is how the UFC approaches Khabib and how they fix that little bit of a PR problem they have. Devin, anything else before we go here?
I would just encourage people to subscribe to the Cage Rage podcast. Stay tuned. We're talking about this stuff in advance. We'll look at the rankings is another thing. Get familiar with how these guys are ranked, who's in these divisions, and try to sort this out right now with this division. It's the hardest at all. I mean, we didn't even mention with Max Holloway moving up what is going on at featherweight is another thing. And, featherweight's just wide open now, too. And so those 2 divisions, but definitely lightweight, are just so chaotic right now. And it's very, very interesting. I mean, I'm checking the big news sites every day to see what fights get announced right now, and definitely the two fighters that I'm looking at the most, without a doubt, is Conor McGregor and Tony Ferguson to see what happens to them next, because that interim title fight is. A lot of people think that if they were going to do an interim title fight, it probably should have been Tony and Conor, but we got Max and Dustin. So it's a very stacked division, and it's very hard to tell what's going on next.
Yep, they sometimes say, hey, it's a nice problem to have too much talent, but as we've covered here, the problem with it is that there is the potential for one of these fighters to get left out in the cold. Technically, you could almost say Ferguson's already maybe missed a payday, held off, and that sort of stuff. So we'll see if the UFC can keep everyone happy. I'm Miguel Iturrate. He's Devin Miller. We're the MMA team here at the CRP, the Cage Rage podcast. Give us a look and a like, and we'll be back with a review of the featherweight division later on this week.